it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Louisiana. It has unfairly been described as a fresh air mental asylum, but that might not be too far from the truth if tonight's story is anything to go by. The first of 2 videos tonight in Double Dose Wednesday. So here we go with the monsters from the Louisiana Bayou. I was ever so excited. Mum had finally agreed to letting my older sister Judy and I stay the summer at my grandfather's house in Plaquemine Parish, Louisiana. Mum was a native of London and had met my father when she'd visited New Orleans one Mardi Gras. They'd fallen madly in love and were married 6 months later. After a few years, Mum had come to detest New Orleans. The crime, the summer's relentless heat, the decadence and, she said, the evil had all proved too much for her, and she'd persuaded my father to return to England with her when I was but a baby. Judy was 2 years my senior, and she said she could remember our grandfather, but I doubted her. I really couldn't have asked for a better older sister. Judy was pretty and kind, and she usually included me in her activities. Most of her friends weren't thrilled to have a younger brother tag along, but Judy just smiled and told them it was a 2-for-1 deal. She certainly wasn't as excited as I at the prospect of our upcoming adventure, possibly because she'd just discovered boys, and we weren't at all certain there were any kids our age around grandfather's place, and we dared not ask Mum. We reckoned she might become suspicious or worried, especially as far as Judy was concerned, and we didn't want to take a chance of her cancelling our summer plans. She was hesitant enough as it was, insisting upon making the flight down with us from Heathrow to New Orleans. She rented a car at New Orleans Airport, and we drove another 2 hours to grandfather's little house, way past the city, toward the Gulf of Mexico. We marveled at the big oak trees that dripped with grey, beard-like hangings, which we later learned were called Spanish moss. The air was heavy with moisture. I could almost taste it. I was more than a little intrigued with this new world and its green and grey landscape, which became more surreal with each passing mile. I was more than excited than I'd ever been in my entire 12 years of life. I was more excited than I'd ever been in my entire 12 years of life. Oh, I wish I could go back to that time. I wish that summer had never happened. I wish. Mum, Judy and I arrived at grandfather's little house late one evening, so we couldn't tell much about our surroundings. The house was more of a shack, unpainted, rising high off the ground on stilts to keep the floodwaters out. I vaguely wondered what might be living in the dark under the little house. I didn't want to think about it. We'd travelled for 10 hours straight and were exhausted, so after hugging grandfather and having a snack, Judy and I collapsed into our bunk beds in the room we would share for the next 2 months. We could hear Mum and grandfather's muffled voices as we drifted off to a chorus of chirping crickets outside our screened window, so far above the ground. Mum would stay for a few days while we settled in, probably in the hopes that one or both of us would change our minds about our summer in Louisiana. She drove into town, which consisted of a grocery store on one end of the highway and a hardware store on the other, where she bought a ridiculous amount of food, lest Judy or I starve out in the swamp. Well, neither of us complained, as we'd heard the stories about people in southern Louisiana eating mostly possums, squirrels, and rabbits, supplemented with perhaps the occasional snake or alligator. Mum would regale us with these stories of Louisiana, their details largely depending on how much wine she consumed with dinner. Our father, when he was alive, could put on his Cajun accent and say, "Well, yeah, damn some good eating," and pretend he'd never had a pizza or a hamburger until he'd left Bayou Boudreaux to go to college. Now, as we drove down the road to Plaquemine Parish, through the swampy pasture land toward Grandpa's, as grandfather had asked we call him, we weren't so sure that Mum and Dad had exaggerated in their drunken descriptions of his childhood fare. I would have bet anything that there were at least a dozen snakes in the ditches along the side of the road, and probably an alligator or two lurking in the palmetto plants just beyond. I began to have misgivings, but I was a 12-year-old boy, and I wasn't about to chicken out. I'd never admit to being frightened of anything, at least not then. A few days later, Mum headed back to London, holding back her tears and turning quickly to enter the little rental car. Judy and I waved goodbye from the front porch, promising to call home every day before noon so she could sleep well that night. We laughed at Mum's demand, but we both promised. Grandpa waved a huge, gnarled hand toward the departing car and herded us into the kitchen, where he sat us at the blue Formica table and poured us each a giant cup of coffee milk. He sat down opposite us with his big cup of coffee and chicory and began to lay down the rules of the house. "Well, Chair, these ain't really rules. They're just things to make it easy for us to all get along right. I've been on my own since your grandma died, so I'm set in my ways, you know," Grandpa said in his matter-of-fact way. Grandpa had what Mum called a Cajun accent, and he was said to be one of the last true Cajuns down in southeast Louisiana. He could speak that Cajun language and even play zydeco music on his hand accordion. He was a soft-spoken giant of a man, but when he got that look in his eye, we knew he meant business. "Now, Cher, I'm the cook around here. I'll tell you now, I'm a good un, yes I am. I've been making you some good breakfast and some better supper, but around noontime, you better grab yourself some bread and make yourself something, 'cause I'll likely be sleeping over there in my bedroom to keep that arthritis from getting to my joints too bad. And," he added as an afterthought, "you're responsible for those dishes too, 'cause that arthritis be killing my joints by nighttime. We got a deal?" "Oh yes, Grandpa, we got a deal," Judy and I both said together. "Now, there'll be one more thing, children. It's the most important thing, and that's why I saved it for last." Grandpa had that no fooling around look in his eyes. He lowered his voice, and we leaned in. "Now, you need to be telling me exactly where you're going when you leave this house, you hear? And you need to tell me the truth. I don't want to hear neither you children going past the line of the highway, 'cause the swamp is right on the other side. There's things in that swamp." His voice trailed off as he realized he was probably scaring the bejesus out of us. Well, we thought the lecture was over, but he gave us that look and continued. "And there's things in that swamp you ain't never seen and you don't want to see. You understand your Grandpa?" "You mean snakes and alligators, Grandpa?" I asked, wanting him to be impressed by the fact that I'd done my research on the Louisiana swamps. "Oh, I wish that was all there was for me to be warning you about," Grandpa answered, and then repeated. "Y'all just keep around here. Do not go past the tree line with them palmetto palms, ever." Judy grimaced behind Grandpa, and I stifled a smile. "Now, finish that coffee milk, and we're gonna have ourselves some good old Cajun music out on the front porch," Grandpa said as he grabbed his little hand accordion. He gave me a washboard and a brush, and gave Judy the big wooden spoon that would serve as a microphone, and have ourselves some genuine Cajun music. Yes, sir, we did. Well, word apparently traveled fast around Bayou Boudreaux, because the day after Mum left, a boy I thought to be a year or two older than I, and probably around Judy's age, showed up at Grandpa's house, asking him if he needed any work done or maybe the lawn mowed. As was the custom, Grandpa called the boy up onto the front porch to have a seat and discuss the possibility of some sort of employment. It was polite to sit for a while and have a glass of lemonade or iced tea. Judy and I wormed our way out onto the porch in hopes that this boy was friend material. As it turned out, after about 15 minutes of interrogation, Grandpa discovered that the boy was the son of Calvin James, a neighbor who lived just about 2 miles down the road, towards Fontenot's Landing, just at the edge of the Black Swamp. And just like that, we had a friend. I think Judy and Eli were more than friends, and the energy they exuded when they were together was not lost on Grandpa or me. I swear, when Judy and Eli were less than 2 feet apart, I didn't dare get anywhere near them for fear of being shocked by the electricity. It was soon after meeting Eli that I began to usher in my thoughts with, "I swear." I'd heard this habit of speech from both Eli and Grandpa, so I thought it was only proper for me to incorporate it into my speech as well. It was something Mum would try to break me out of when I returned to London, but I've retained that particular quirk of speech to this very day. I thought Eli was just about the coolest guy I'd ever met. It soon became evident that Judy thought the same. He was everything I wanted to be when I became 14 years old. Tall, strong, a mane of jet black hair he brushed absently from his forehead. He knew all about sports, but on the other hand, he could play a scene from a Shakespeare play with the authenticity of a seasoned actor. He had the slightest of southern drawls, which endeared him to my sister, and when we weren't fortunate enough to be in his company, we spoke incessantly about our new friend. I don't know which one of us had more of a crush on him. I swear I don't. Well, Eli had a part-time job at the hardware store a couple of evenings a week, which was probably a good thing because he was at our house more often than his own, as Grandpa had uttered under his breath one afternoon after Eli finally left. I think Grandpa liked Eli, but he took his responsibility for me and Judy with a solemn sincerity which I thought was just something all grandfathers did. I would find that there was a reason he watched over us like an old mother hen, wanting to know where we were, when we'd be back, and how exactly we were getting home. Within the week, Judy and I considered the little cabin our home as well. We felt a sense of belonging the London flat had never offered us, although we'd lived there our entire lives. Grandfather's two-bedroom wooden shack, as Mother called it, felt like a place that had called to me, the place I should be. While it was true that Grandpa's persistent, watchful eye could become irksome at times, those were the only moments Judy and I felt a bit stifled. One afternoon, Eli suggested we all go swimming down on Big Boudreaux Bayou. The Louisiana summer temperatures had risen well into the 90s, and Grandpa didn't believe in air conditioners, so, needless to say, Judy and I were thrilled with the prospect of a cool dip into the dark waters of the bayou. We hurried in to change. We'd only seen the bayou in passing when Grandpa had taken us there during one of our orientation walks. He'd sternly admonished us to never go down there alone, but we reckoned we wouldn't be alone if we were there with Eli, so we blithely yelled to our keeper we were going swimming out on the bayou with Eli. We could hear his heavy footsteps echoing through the house and banging onto the front porch just as we were closing the yard gate. "Say, what, yeah?" he asked, with an incredulous look on his big, kind face. "You done lost both your minds. You get yourself back in here right now. Eli, you get in here too." Well, no amount of protests could shake the scowl off Grandpa's wizened face. Judy and I knew something was wrong. We'd crossed an invisible line, and we hushed our whining and sat on the swing and waited. We hadn't long to wait. Grandpa sat in his wooden rocker and held tightly onto its arms, worn from years of fingers caressing the wood. "I'm going to tell you children something," he said solemnly. "You don't need to go telling your mama anything, because it would just upset her, but I'm going to tell you two. Eli here probably done heard all about this." He looked from Judy to me, and then Eli. We all stared at him intently. "There's a reason I don't want you going to no Big Boudreaux Bayou, even with Eli here going with you. There was a real bad thing that happened down there about 12 years ago. Ain't nobody done forgot it yet." I only then saw the bottle of wild turkey sitting by Grandpa's rocking chair. He reached for it and took a good, long drink of the brown liquid, grimaced, and began to speak. "Yeah, there was this family, Frank Hardwine and them. One time they living up on the bluff over the big bayou. Them kids was all in that bayou most every day, especially during the summertime when it was so hot, like it is now. Nobody done thought nothing of it. Their daddy was always with them, and one day their daddy's brother done come up from Baton Rouge and brought his kids with him, so they's all down at that bayou swimming and diving and floating on them inner tubes. And that oldest boy of Frank's, he done run down that side of that bayou to dive off a little bit higher ground. I reckon he was showing off. He's yelling at his daddy to watch him do his dive, and Frank and his brother were looking right at him when he jumped off. Head first, right into a big old nest of water moccasin snakes. He was dead and gone by the time they got him over to the hospital. Well, nothing they could do for the boy. He was all black and swole up. Didn't even look like no human being. Grandpa continued. Yeah, so that big bayou, that's a dark place. A bad place. It was bad before, and people always said it was cursed when the white settlers done killed all them Indians who lived there along and through the years. Things like that poor boy getting ate up by snakes happen every now and again. I thought I was going to lose my lunch, and I could tell by Judy's face that she was about to cry. Well, that little story took the wind out of our sails, and Eli and I ended up sitting on the front porch while Judy made some cold lemonade for us. We three sat in silence, and I guess Grandpa felt kind of bad because he went and got his old guitar and a bag of pralines to sugar us up good. Well, nobody felt much like playing music, so Grandpa went solo, just strumming some nice, soothing chords that faded away into the hot, sultry air. Eli's voice was soft but insistent when he said, "Mr. Ellis, can you tell us that other story?" "What are you talking about, Eli?" "You know, that other story about those pig things that live back in the swamp." "Oh, you mean them pig people?" Grandpa raised his thick, gray brows. "Yes, sir," Eli almost whispered. "My pa, he won't say nothing, and I mean nothing about them, and when I ask anything, he gets real mad." "Well, I hope we ain't speaking out of turn then, boy." "I need to know," Eli responded. "Don't you think we all need to know, since we're living right here next to the swamp?" Grandpa apparently reckoned Eli had a point, and said he'd been meaning to get around to telling us the story. I guess he decided then was as good a time as any to tell us about the things in the swamp. Well, I'm going to start at the beginning. At the beginning meaning way back when I was just a boy, not much older than you all. There was this family living around here. Let's just say his last name was Rene. They done had this boy that weren't right in the head. Oh, he was a big old boy, but they say he had the mind of a 3-year-old child. And the Renes, they kept a bunch of farming animals, and they fished, and they butchered, and they got along okay, I reckon. Well, the story goes that this boy, I believe his name was Ray, Ray ended up getting real sick when he was just about your age, and they took him up to the big hospital right close to New Orleans to see what was the matter with him. Now, you all know this here place is one for gossip. It don't take much to get a story going. Well, it weren't no different back then when I was a boy. The men folks and the women folks didn't have no television, and gossiping was the town's main entertainment. So, I ain't saying for sure if it was true or not. You understand? Grandpa took a swig from the wild turkey bottle. He swallowed, grimaced again, and continued. Now, the story was that Ray had done found himself one of them old sows in the back pen at that there house. Grandpa began to falter a little and turned a bit red. I reckon it weren't his fault. He was coming to be a man, and he didn't know no better. He weren't all there in the head, you know. Well, that boy, he done been with one of them sows in a Bible way, like a man and woman when they be married. Grandpa continued quickly. And I guess he done got some disease from sinning like that, 'cause Mrs. Riley, who worked up at the hospital, done told Mrs. Willis about seeing Ray at the doctor's with his daddy. Oh, Lordy, the gossip in this here town, was something awful. I thought it weren't ever gonna die down. Preacher done preached about gossiping, but that only made it worse. And one day out of the blue, somebody killed the entire Doucette family, and that story took over. Ray and the pig story done wore itself out. Well, except for the parents telling their children to stay away from that Ray Rene boy. So, as the years passed by, eventually nobody thought much about it. That is until 10-15 years later when some folks saw something in the swamp. Grandpa took another swig. Alfred Wilson was out in his little pirogue with his wife. Pretty little thing, I remember. They was fishing and setting lines. The way Alfred tells it. 10-foot alligator came straight at him and tipped over that little pirogue. Alfred hit his head pretty hard on something. Maybe a cypress stump, maybe the boat. He was stunned, that's the way he put it. And he sees something that looked like another pirogue, but it wasn't nothing he'd ever seen before. Then he saw this man-thing in the funny-looking boat. That man-thing done grabbed Allie and pulled her in, her legs dangling over the side. The sheriff was not sympathetic. A man takes his wife out to the swamp and only he returns. That was downright fishy to him. The whole damn story was fishy, but it was so crazy it might just be the truth. It was just one man in the other boat, the one that took Allie. The sheriff asked for the 5th time. And they had that boy up in an old blanket, give him some coffee, and just start asking questions. He was most likely in shock, but ain't nobody back then know what shock was, Grandpa said. It weren't no man, Alfay answered low and deliberately. It weren't no man. Oh, what the hell was it? The sheriff showed no mercy for his primary murder suspect. There was a big pig in that boat. It was a damn pig, but he stood up on his back legs and used his front legs or arms, or whatever the hell they were, to grab Allie. He made this sound, and it sounded like a man trying to sound like a pig squealing. Oh, he had a face that was kind of like a man, but he had pig ears and a pig snout, and he squealed, and Allie was screaming, and I couldn't get to her. Alfay broke. His shoulder sagged and his body shook from heavy sobs. That boy cried nonstop for over an hour, and they finally had to get him to hospital so the doctor could help him. I reckon he had a nervous breakdown. They never charged him, and they closed the case as an accident, likely drowning of Miss Allie. Grandpa continued. We dared not interrupt him with questions. Word got around like it always did. I reckon that old dumb deputy opened his dang mouth trying to impress some girls down at the club. I don't know for sure. But 10 or 12 of them dumbass boys decided they'd go hunting this pig man and maybe put him in a sideshow and make a bunch of money. Well, that's what they told their daddies, and I guess that sounded pretty good, because about 8 or 10 of their daddies decided to join them. I remember they had a dang navy of about 8 boats, all sizes, leaving the landing, heading straight into the Black Swamp. Yeah, out they go. Dumbasses, Grandpa snorted. Around dark, they all come stumbling back in, full of stories, more likely full of whiskey and beer. They say they saw 2 of them, all covered with mud and straw, and so the story and the legend started right off then and there. The pig people of the Black Swamp. Alfay got himself almost famous. They even took him over there to New Orleans to interview him on one of them local TV shows. Every time he made a description of that thing he saw, it got more and more crazy. By the time he was done and the story had died down, damn thing that got hold of Allie stood more than 9 feet tall, all covered in black mud with red eyes and a big old pig snout instead of a nose. It was like Alfay done forgot about his little wife, Miss Allie. Then, one day, the host of the show done lowered her voice and asked Alfay, real serious-like, if he thought his wife was dead. And Alfay said, real sad-like, I just hope she drowned. All right, that's enough for today. You children's gonna have bad dreams. I'll tell you the rest another time. It's almost dark and Eli needs to be getting himself home. Grandpa didn't have to tell Eli twice. He looked at Judy and said he'd see us tomorrow, and he hightailed it down the road to his house. Grandpa said he didn't feel like cooking nothing, so we had some grits for dinner, and nobody said a word. Grandpa went to his room, leaving us to clean up. Do you think that's true? What Grandpa told us? I asked Judy. I don't know, she said, and I'm not looking to find out. Well, the next day Eli came by and we could talk of nothing but the pig people. After a supper of fried chicken, buttery mashed potatoes, and lima beans, we begged Grandpa to tell us the rest of the story. As Eli said, we needed to know, didn't we? Well, where was I? Grandpa asked. You were at the part where Alfay became famous, but his wife was never heard from again, and the last he saw her was the pig man grabbing her and throwing her in the boat. Eli answered quickly. Oh, yeah. Well, there's been stories for years now, but the fact is, There have been more than a few of what they call unexplained disappearances around here. Probably more than our share. But I thought I was a serial killer, like the one they found in Baton Rouge, Eli gently interrupted. Well, Eli, the thing is, that's exactly what they want you to think. They kept it real quiet. Guess they don't want to panic folks. Just a picture in the paper one day and that'd be it. Maybe a search party for a day or two, but that black swamp, well, she's so big I ain't gonna find nobody if they don't want to be found, or even if they do. We just don't know, do we? Grandpa glanced involuntarily at Judy and then said, it's mostly women that disappeared, you know. Story is that the pig men need women so they can carry on their kinds. One woman only bears one child a year, so they need breeding women, and I guess they got their cravings just like most men. So that's why you see, to this day, women always be walking in twos. Not one woman will walk down this road alone, not even in daylight. No, sirree. That's just stupid, I said, more from absolute fear than indignation. Well, you'd think so, Grandpa agreed, till little Ivy Richer come walking out of the swamp one day, after she was gone for more than a year. She weren't but about 14, 15 years old, but the doctor said she'd done experienced childbirth. Well, what did she say? I demanded, rather rudely. That's the thing, Sheriff. She ain't never said a word. Her mind's done gone. They had to put her in that place in New Orleans for the crazy people, and to this day, she ain't never said a word. Well, she's probably just got lost and managed to live out there in the woods, and that's all, I said. Yeah, that's a possibility, Grandpa agreed. And him agreeing didn't make me feel any better. I was beginning to wonder what the hell I'd gotten myself into coming to Louisiana. I was beginning to really miss London. So, that's it, I said nonchalantly. That's the story? You sure you want to hear the rest, Sheriff? Grandpa asked, seriously. Yeah, of course, I said boldly. Well, we around here close to the swamp, and damn fishermen and gator catchers brave enough to venture out there now began to smell something that weren't right. At first we thought it was each other barbecuing, and then we started asking around, and ain't none of us been barbecuing here in the wintertime. And the other thing we noticed, well, it was all at the store a few years ago, not long after that college student from New Orleans, Tulane, I believe he was from, done went missing. But the swamp is a damn big place, and ain't too many of these here men happy to wander too far out there these days. So, the sheriff called the search off, and we was all in the store drinking some coffee from the machine and speculating about what might have happened to that boy. Most agreed that the gators got him, but then, almost at the same time, we started sniffing something. Andrew was the first to ask, who the hell's barbecuing in this weather? Well, it's so cold. I just looked at each other. Must have been 8 or 9 of us there. And, you know, sometimes when you just don't need to say a word, when you pretty damn sure the other person know exactly what you're thinking. Well, we knew we was the only ones who lived down Sutter Road, and Sutter Road's the only road that goes to the boat landing in the swamp. So we go outside to get a better whiff, and we sure did. Smelled like a big old barbecue going on down towards our house here, or maybe Eli's place. It wasn't us, and we couldn't figure out who would be barbecuing in the swamps in the middle of the winter. Then it hit us all about the same time. That boy was somebody's dinner tonight. Oh, I know that's what I thought. I'd bet on it that it's what they all thought, but nobody ever said a word. Holy shit, I said. Holy shit. Grandpa gave me a look, but didn't reprimand me. Well, if the damn water moccasins don't get us, the pig people will. I was serious. I was never leaving the front porch again. But what was to keep one of those snakes from coming in the screen door that didn't quite close? Or what was keeping those pig people from creeping up one night to our house and looking in the window? Holy shit. Judy and I whispered back and forth from our bunk beds that night, more to hear each other's voices than to really carry on a conversation. The night was black, but the sky retaliated with the silver light of 1,000,000 stars and a full moon, its beams shining into crevices of the forest and into the nooks and corners of our bedroom. Silhouettes of pigs and monster faces played upon the wall. Judy tried to scare me when she said, "Quiet, listen, do you hear that squealing?" I think she ended up terrifying herself as much as she did me. Well, it was a long night with only fitful bouts of sleep. I was rather glad of summer nearing its end. It had been a splendid adventure until the stories about the pigmen were shared, and suddenly I didn't feel so brave about the great unknown. I wanted it to stay unknown. I longed for my familiar room and bed and posters of Man U on the wall, and I missed my mum. Judy, on the other hand, was dreading the day she'd say goodbye to Eli. I think she was in love, or whatever 14-year-old girls are when they walk around all goofy-eyed and smiling as though they knew a special secret. She was oblivious to anything but Eli. Eli this and Eli that. Well, I liked Eli, but I'd had enough. Enough of young love, enough of water moccasins sliding around, and enough of pigmen kidnapping people and doing no telling what with them. I couldn't think about it. Not a day later, Grandpa made a point of telling us to be sure that we put the lid on the garbage cans real tight, because some animals had been making the rounds and going through people's garbage, making a real mess. Well, he said it nonchalantly, but I thought I saw something like worry in his furrowed brow. I lay awake most nights now, thankful we were up at least 8 feet off the ground due to the heavy stilts that raised the house and formed its structure. I could look out at the night and feel safe, above it all, snug in my bed. And then I saw it. It emerged from the palmetto grove, walking like a man, but with a face that still haunts me. The first thing I noticed was a snout. A pig snout, and what I think was a mouth below it. The mouth was a single large slit. Huge pink ears flapped on each side of its head, and the eyes were black and beady. I thought I must be dreaming, but the pig man headed straight across the backyard and turned over the garbage can in an instant. He rummaged around and grabbed a few things. Food, I guess. Then he looked up at me and smiled. He turned and loped across the yard with great speed, and suddenly, as quickly as he'd appeared, he was gone. The knife-sharp palmetto fronds waved in his wake. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. No one would believe me. If I woke Grandpa and told him, he might think I lost my mind and keep me inside where he could watch me until Mum would come for me. I decided I would tell no one. But now, I tell you. I know you won't think me insane. The summer rains had come, and the air was so heavy that, inevitably, around 1 or 2 in the afternoon, the rains would come. It was a warm rain and didn't really cool the air. It only made you feel sticky. I hadn't been feeling well. I wanted to go home. Mum was set to come and collect us next week. It was only 2 nights later when I saw the creature again. He stood beside my bunk bed and looked at me with curiosity. But soon he turned to his real interest. Judy lay on the bottom bed, clad only in a pink and white cotton gown. Her strawberry blonde hair was spread across the pillow and her eyes were closed. One huge arm encircled her waist and pulled her to him. He grunted, buried his snout into her hair and sniffed. I couldn't move. Then he turned, and as he was leaving, Grandpa stepped into his pathway holding a baseball bat in one hand and his .45 in the other. The pig man pushed Grandpa away as if he were a pesky mosquito, grabbing the .45 in the process. Judy screamed, looking at me, begging me to save her. I jumped from my bunk and screamed at the thing to stop, to drop her, that she was my sister. He kicked me so hard I thought my head had come off. I was completely knocked unconscious. When I awoke, the thing was gone. Judy was gone, just like that. My big sister was gone, and God knows what was going to happen to her now. I attended to Grandpa as best I could and phoned 911 for the sheriff. At least Grandpa would be able to back me up in my horrible story. The sheriff soon appeared, rumpled with sleep, and began asking questions of me and Grandpa. I didn't hear him make any calls, and it was already 5 a.m. Time was of the essence. When I asked what would be done, he just said, "Leave it up to us men, son. We've seen this kind of thing before. We'll go out a ways and try to find her. Best you stay here and take care of your Grandpa. He had a bad fall. Y'all both ought to get to the hospital." We refused to go anywhere, and I got another cold towel for Grandpa. We managed to get him up and into his chair. The doctor came, he gave us both sedatives, and I could finally think somewhat clearly, without the horror. In a way, my lucid thoughts were even worse. I had failed my sister. I'd let her go. I'd done nothing to help her. My only solace was I didn't think they wanted to eat Judy. I thought they wanted her for breeding. Well, I had no idea how that would happen, if it was one pigman or another, or all of them. They were grabbing females and were obviously becoming more brazen about it. Miss Allie had been there first. She became pregnant and bore the first child for the pigman. She cared for the infant, as would any mother, with love and tenderness. The good and kind woman that she was, she tried to teach the child and its father some words so they could communicate, and she showed her mate how to cook with fire and garner pieces of wood that they could carve into pots and bowls. She wove hats and shoes for them. She made them a home. The day Allie had been captured, she'd been terrified. She slowly realized that this pigman meant her no harm, and realized that the poor, disfigured creature must have been the product of the Ray incident so many years ago. She had no idea how this could have happened, but the undeniable result stood above her now, his hoof-like hands on her shoulders. She'd nodded toward a corner in the straw and root cave they would share. Then, he was gone. She lay sobbing in the cool den. The creature returned, having garnered the softest leaves and pine straw he could find. She fell into the straw, terrified. He lay on the other end of the burrow, and soon she could hear his snoring. She slept. Now Judy was merely one of the missing women. Missing, I would say that incredulously. She was kidnapped, she was taken, she was stolen from our bed. No one listened to me. The news only said a 14-year-old girl from Boudreaux's Bayou had gone missing, now for 3 days. I'd almost gone crazy. Perhaps I did. I cried and begged for a boat so I could go look for her. No one would lend me their boat, let alone go with me to look for my sister. Eli had the same problem. It was as though everyone just wanted to forget about it. These damn English people coming down here and causing trouble. That's what I overheard one day at the grocery store. Well, I was speechless. "Well, at least I ain't smelled nothing cooking," one of them said, not knowing I was standing behind him. Grandfather called Mum and closed his eyes tight while she screamed and cried into the phone. She was taking the next flight. I hope she was able to drive. She arrived, and I guess the hysteria had subsided into anxiety and fear. She simply wanted her little girl. The so-called search continued for a week. The sheriff said that's all the department had money for. Mum went out in one of the sheriff's boats a few times. Well, I had cried and begged to go, and to the sheriff's dismay, I was allowed to join the search party on the last day. We saw nothing but snakes and alligators, a few wild boar, and bevies of snow-white egrets. Had the swamp not held such terror for me, such foreboding, I think I would have found it beautiful in a mysterious, grey sort of way. And I knew, I could feel it. Judy was out there somewhere, and no one would ever find her. Mum and I finally returned to London. She left Judy's clothes hanging in the closet of our little room. She put fresh sheets on the bottom bunk and placed her diary under the pillow. Mum gave Eli one of Judy's favourite necklaces and put the other one around her own neck. She never took it off. Every night, I think that I should have done something. I should have jumped on the back of that pig thing and bitten his ear off. I should have screamed. I should have fought for my sister. Grandfather died later that fall. I think he died from stress and a broken heart. Mum refuses to sell the land or the house. She says it should be exactly as it was that summer, just in case Judy should ever find her way home. So, a funny story about that one. The author sent that to me way back, way long ago. Can't even remember when I first got that one. And, well, it was there in the back of my mind. Oh, I should do it. Really enjoyed that one. Thought it was great. But, I don't know. To be honest, I played this all kind of like by instinct, almost. What should I read tonight? What should I read? And so many times I've tried to plan out things weeks in advance, and it just doesn't work. So quite often I just wake up in the morning saying, well, what kind of mood am I in today? What do I want to read? And that's why you got this one today. Now, as I said, that's the first of your Double Dose Wednesday. Yep, just had 2 stories I wanted to read to you, and I'm releasing them both today. So quite a long stretch for you to listen to, but 2 different videos. Let's see how it goes. If you like the idea, I'll keep doing it more often, but if you don't, I might do it anyway. Who knows? Anyway, so not enough from me for one evening for the first time ever, because there's more to come. But until then, until next time, very, very sweet dreams, and stay awake because there's another video coming.